For 27 years, one question haunted a family, frustrated investigators, and divided an entire nation. Who killed 6-year-old Adam Walsh? The answer seemed simple at first. A child vanished from a busy department store in broad daylight. Hundreds of shoppers were nearby. Employees were everywhere. A police station sat just across the street. Yet somehow, a little boy disappeared without a trace. What followed became one of the most infamous child murder investigations in American history. It would expose devastating mistakes, lost evidence, conflicting suspects, and questions that many believe were never fully answered. But before Adam Walsh became a headline, a law, or a symbol, he was simply a 6-year-old boy spending an ordinary afternoon with his mother. And on July 27, 1981, everything changed. Imagine standing inside a Sears department store just after noon. The fluorescent lights are bright. Shoppers move between aisles. Employees help customers at nearby counters. Outside the windows, traffic rolls past Hollywood Boulevard. 40 feet away sits the local police station. Nothing about the scene feels dangerous. Nothing feels unusual. Your 6-year-old son is somewhere in the store. At least, that's what you believe. A voice suddenly echoes through the building. Adam Walsh, please come to customer service. You hear it once, then again, and again. Each announcement feels heavier than the last. You search every aisle, every department, every restroom. You return to the toy section where you left him only minutes earlier. He's not there. The other boys are gone too. The video game they had been playing sits silent. 2 controllers rest on the floor. And for the first time, a terrifying possibility enters your mind. Your child is gone. Before that day, Adam Walsh was exactly the kind of child every parent hopes for. He was 6 years old, small for his age, freckle-faced with sandy blonde hair and hazel eyes. He loved baseball. He loved drawing. Saturday mornings meant cartoons and Sesame Street. Most of all, he was shy, not the kind of shyness children eventually grow out of. A deeper kind, the kind that made him hesitant around strangers, the kind that made him reluctant to speak up. For years, that trait had simply been part of who he was. No one could have imagined it might one day matter. His parents, John and Reve Walsh, were building what appeared to be a successful life in South Florida. John was helping oversee a major hotel development project in Miami. Reve was balancing school, family life, and her own ambitions. At the center of their world was Adam, their only child, their future. And on the morning of July 27th, nothing seemed different from any other day. The day began with errands. Around 11 a.m., Reve and Adam left home together. One stop involved registering Adam for 2nd grade. The second stop was Hollywood Mall. There was a lamp at Sears Reve had been watching for months, waiting for it to go on sale. That was the entire reason for the trip. A school errand. A discounted lamp. Nothing more. They parked and entered through the north entrance of the store. Then Adam spotted something that instantly captured his attention. An Atari display. In 1981, few attractions inside a department store could compete with an Atari console. Children crowded around it, waiting for turns, watching the screen, completely absorbed. Adam immediately joined them. Reve looked around. Employees were nearby. Security personnel were visible. Customers filled the store. The police station sat across the street. Everything appeared safe. So she made a decision that countless parents would have made. She told Adam she would be gone only a few minutes. He nodded. Okay, Mommy. Then he turned back toward the game. Those would become some of the last words she ever heard him speak. The lamp section wasn't far away. The item she wanted wasn't available. The employee she needed to speak with was on lunch break. She left her contact information and headed back. The entire errand took roughly 10 to 15 minutes. Nothing extraordinary. Nothing alarming. But when she returned to the toy department, something felt wrong immediately. The group of boys was gone. Adam wasn't there. At first, she assumed he had wandered somewhere nearby. She called his name. No answer. She checked neighboring aisles. Nothing. She searched the restrooms. Nothing. The feeling in her stomach grew heavier. She moved faster. More aisles. More departments. Still nothing. Then she went to customer service. An announcement was made over the store's public address system. No response. A second announcement followed. Nothing. Then a third. Still nothing. The longer the silence continued, the more frightening it became. Because deep down, Reve was beginning to understand something she desperately didn't want to believe. Adam wasn't lost inside the store. He wasn't hiding. And he wasn't simply distracted. Somehow, in the middle of a crowded department store on a bright summer afternoon, 6-year-old Adam Walsh had vanished. What Reve didn't know was that something important had already happened while she was away. Something that would remain hidden for decades. Only minutes after she left the toy department, an argument broke out among several boys gathered around the Atari display. The dispute escalated. A young security employee was called over to intervene. She separated the children and escorted them away from the area. Among them was a small, shy 6-year-old boy wearing green shorts and a red and white striped shirt. That a boy who didn't argue. A boy who didn't explain himself. A boy who rarely spoke to strangers. That boy was Adam Walsh. And the decision made in the next few moments may have changed everything. What happened after Adam left that toy department would become one of the most disputed and consequential moments in the entire investigation. And by the time the truth finally surfaced, decades had already passed. The first hours after a child disappears are often the most important. In Adam Walsh's case, they were also the most damaging. As Reve searched the aisles of Sears, she still believed there had to be a simple explanation. Maybe Adam had wandered. Maybe he had followed another child. Maybe he was frightened and hiding somewhere inside the store. But with every passing minute, those possibilities became harder to believe. Finally, the Hollywood Police Department was contacted. What happened next would become one of the most criticized aspects of the entire case. The police station was directly across the street from Sears, visible from the store's windows. Yet nearly 2 hours passed between Adam's disappearance and the moment officers became fully involved. For a family living through every second of uncertainty, it felt like an eternity. When John Walsh received the call, he rushed from Miami toward Hollywood. The drive felt endless. His mind raced through every possibility. Children wandered away all the time. Children were found all the time. Surely Adam would be found too. Surely this would end with relief. But when John arrived, he immediately sensed something was wrong. The urgency he expected wasn't there. The fear he felt wasn't being matched. According to John, one officer attempted to reassure him by suggesting that children often walked home on their own. John couldn't believe what he was hearing. Adam was 6 years old. He had never traveled anywhere alone. Their home was miles away. Nothing about the situation made sense. And yet investigators still appeared to be treating the disappearance as though it were a routine missing child report. Not an abduction, not an emergency, just a child who would likely turn up. That assumption would haunt the case for years. As daylight faded, the search expanded. Friends arrived. Neighbors arrived. Volunteers arrived. Flyers began appearing everywhere. Businesses posted Adam's photograph. Search teams combed nearby neighborhoods. Vehicles searched roads and parking lots. Every lead was pursued. Every reported sighting was checked. Every phone call created a surge of hope, then disappointment, then hope again, over and over. For John and Reve, sleep became impossible. Neither wanted to leave the police station. Every ringing telephone felt important. Every update felt critical. Somewhere out there, their son might still be alive. And until someone proved otherwise, they refused to give up. As the hours became days, the reality of 1981 began working against them. Today, a missing child case can trigger alerts within minutes. Photographs spread instantly. Information travels nationwide. Back then, almost none of those systems existed. There was no Amber Alert. No nationwide network dedicated to missing children. No coordinated system capable of rapidly distributing information across the country. Many of the protections people now take for granted simply did not exist. The Walsh family quickly discovered that finding a missing child often depended on persistence, publicity, and luck. A terrifying combination. So they created their own search effort. The family printed hundreds of thousands of flyers. Rewards increased repeatedly. Volunteers flooded search areas. Truck drivers shared information over CB radios. Businesses donated supplies. Strangers offered help. People who had never met Adam suddenly cared deeply about bringing him home. But despite the enormous effort, investigators remained stuck. There was no ransom demand. No confirmed sighting. No clear suspect. No evidence explaining where Adam had gone. It was as if he had simply vanished. And as each day passed, the odds of finding him alive grew smaller. Then came August 10th, 14 days after Adam disappeared. Nearly 2 weeks of searching, 2 weeks of uncertainty, 2 weeks of desperate hope. That evening, 2 fishermen were near a drainage canal alongside the Florida Turnpike. The location sat roughly 120 miles north of Hollywood. It was quiet, remote, the kind of place most people would pass without noticing. As they looked toward the water, they spotted something floating near the surface. At first, it appeared to be a doll, something discarded, something harmless. Then they moved closer and immediately realized they were looking at something else entirely. They contacted authorities. Within hours, investigators were facing a horrifying possibility. The next morning, August 11th, John and Reve Walsh appeared on national television. Millions of viewers watched as they pleaded for their son's safe return. They still believed there was a chance. Still believed Adam might be found alive. Still believed they would see him again. But while that interview was being broadcast, investigators were already working on an identification. The news would be devastating. Medical examiners began comparing records. Dental information was reviewed. People who knew Adam were contacted. One confirmation led to another, then another, then another. Eventually, there was no doubt. The remains belonged to Adam Walsh, the 6-year-old boy missing from Sears. The little boy the entire country had been searching for. The little boy whose parents were still begging for his return on live television. Adam was gone. The findings that followed only deepened the horror. The injuries indicated a violent attack. Medical examiners concluded that Adam had likely died very soon after his abduction. There was no evidence suggesting he had been held for days or weeks, and no indication he had survived long after leaving Sears. For the Walsh family, one painful truth became unavoidable. The search they had spent 2 weeks desperately pursuing had already been too late. Their son had likely been dead within days of disappearing. Perhaps even sooner. The grief that followed is difficult to describe. There are tragedies that change lives. Then there are tragedies that divide life into 2 parts. Before and after, for John and Reve Walsh, everything now belonged to the after. The future they imagined was gone. The life they had planned was gone. And despite the discovery of Adam's remains, one critical question remained unanswered. Who did this? Because while investigators now knew what happened to Adam, they still had no idea who took him from Sears, no idea who killed him, and no idea that some of the most important mistakes in the investigation had already occurred. Mistakes that would cost detectives evidence, cost them opportunities, and possibly cost them the chance to ever prove the truth beyond doubt. The hunt for Adam Walsh's killer was only beginning, and soon investigators would find themselves chasing suspects, false leads, shocking confessions, and one name that would dominate the case for decades. A drifter named Otis Toole. But whether he was truly Adam's killer remains one of the most debated questions in American criminal history. By the time investigators confirmed Adam Walsh's identity, the case had already become one of the highest-profile child murder investigations in America. The pressure was immense. The public wanted answers. The media wanted answers. Most importantly, Adam's parents wanted answers. And like investigators in many child homicide cases, police began with the people closest to the victim. Statistically, family members or close acquaintances are often responsible for crimes against children. Investigators knew that, so they started where the evidence usually pointed. John Walsh, Reve Walsh, friends, relatives, anyone with direct access to Adam. Everyone was examined. Everyone was questioned. No possibility could be ignored. Both John and Reve cooperated fully. Both submitted to polygraph examinations. Both were cleared. Nothing suggested either parent had any involvement. Yet investigators continued digging. And soon, their attention shifted toward a man who knew the Walsh family extremely well. James Campbell, known to friends as Dudley. Campbell had once lived with the Walsh family. He had been close enough to share meals with them, close enough to spend time with Adam, close enough to know their routines. Then investigators uncovered something unexpected. Campbell and Reve Walsh had been involved in a long-term affair. Suddenly, detectives believed they might have found a motive. A hidden relationship, potential jealousy, possible secrets. For months, Investigators pursued that theory aggressively. They questioned Campbell repeatedly, examined his movements, analyzed his statements, looked for inconsistencies, anything that could connect him to Adam's disappearance. But no evidence emerged. No witness, no forensic link, no confession, nothing. Eventually, investigators were forced to acknowledge what the evidence had been saying all along. The theory went nowhere. While valuable time was being spent chasing personal drama, the trail leading to Adam's killer continued growing colder. As months turned into years, dozens of names entered the investigation. Some seemed promising. Others collapsed almost immediately. Every lead carried hope. Most ended in disappointment. But one suspect after another was eliminated. The case remained unsolved. Then a new possibility emerged, one that would eventually divide investigators for decades. Jeffrey Dahmer. Today, Jeffrey Dahmer is one of the most infamous serial killers in American history. But in 1981, he was virtually unknown. No one realized what he would become. No one knew the horrors that would later be uncovered inside his apartment. And no one knew whether he might somehow be connected to Adam Walsh. When Dahmer was finally arrested in 1991, investigators began re-examining his past, his movements, his employment history, his whereabouts during Adam's disappearance. What they found was unsettling. Dahmer had been in South Florida during the summer of 1981. He was struggling financially, working odd jobs, living a transient lifestyle, and according to some accounts, he drove a vehicle similar to one reported near the Sears store. Then came the witness identifications. Years after Adam disappeared, several witnesses were shown photographs. Some identified Dahmer as resembling a man they remembered seeing around the time Adam vanished. Not one witness, not two, multiple people. The possibility immediately attracted attention. Had investigators been looking at the wrong man all along? Had one of America's most notorious serial killers abducted Adam Walsh before anyone knew who he was? The theory generated headlines. But there was a problem. No physical evidence connected Dahmer to Adam's murder. No forensic link. No confession. No witness who actually saw him take Adam. Just possibilities, suspicion, and unanswered questions. When questioned, Dahmer denied involvement. And unlike many criminals, he had confessed extensively to numerous murders after his arrest. He admitted crimes that guaranteed he would never leave prison. Yet he consistently denied killing Adam Walsh. Was he telling the truth? Or was this the one crime he chose to hide? No one could prove either answer. And while the debate continued, investigators were becoming increasingly focused on someone else. A drifter named Otis Toole. If Jeffrey Dahmer represented uncertainty, Otis Toole represented chaos. Everything about him seemed disturbing. His criminal history, his violent behavior, his unstable lifestyle, his association with serial killer Henry Lee Lucas. Toole spent years drifting across the country, arrested repeatedly, connected to countless investigations, often inserting himself into crimes that had nothing to do with him. That reputation created a major problem. Because when Toole confessed to Adam Walsh's murder, investigators didn't know whether they were hearing the truth or another lie. At first, his confession looked weak, very weak. He got important details wrong. He described Adam's clothing incorrectly. He changed parts of his story. He contradicted himself. Then he blamed Henry Lee Lucas. Except Lucas had an airtight alibi. He was in jail when Adam disappeared. When investigators confronted Toole about that problem, he changed his story again. Now he claimed he acted alone. For many detectives, that should have ended the discussion. Another unreliable confession. Another dead end. Case closed. But then investigators discovered something troubling. Despite the inaccuracies, Toole knew details that were not publicly available. Details that matched the crime scene. Details that matched the autopsy. Details that should not have been easy to guess. Suddenly, dismissing him became much harder. As investigators dug deeper, more pieces began falling into place. Toole had been in Florida during the critical period. His whereabouts were difficult to verify. His timeline overlapped with Adam's disappearance. And then detectives located a vehicle connected to him. A Cadillac. The vehicle became one of the most controversial pieces of evidence in the entire investigation. Years after Adam's murder, investigators examined it using luminol, a chemical capable of revealing traces of blood invisible to the naked eye. Several areas reacted positively. Photographs were taken, dozens of them. Investigators believed the images might contain crucial evidence. Perhaps even evidence linking Toole directly to Adam. But what happened next became another devastating chapter in the case. The photographs were never properly processed. The evidence wasn't aggressively pursued. Critical materials were misplaced. And over time, opportunities vanished. Some evidence was lost entirely. Not destroyed in a dramatic fire. Not stolen. Simply lost. Mismanaged. Forgotten. Gone. Years later, retired investigators reviewing the case were stunned. Evidence that should have been preserved had disappeared. Potential forensic opportunities had been missed. Items that might have answered lingering questions were no longer available for testing. And every lost piece of evidence strengthened one painful possibility. The truth may have been within reach, only to slip away. Meanwhile, Otis Toole continued a pattern that frustrated everyone involved. He confessed, then recanted, confessed again, then changed details, then withdrew the confession, then repeated it, over and over. At times he seemed determined to admit responsibility. At other times he appeared determined to create confusion. Investigators never knew which version they were hearing. Neither did the Walsh family. Years passed, then decades, and still the question remained. Was Otis Toole telling the truth, or simply manipulating one of America's most heartbreaking investigations? The answer seemed farther away than ever. Then, as the years passed and the case file continued growing, one final review would change everything. A review that would eventually lead police to make a decision that remains controversial to this day. A decision that officially closed the case. But not necessarily the debate. Because when investigators finally announced who killed Adam Walsh, not everyone agreed. And some still don't. By 2008, 27 years had passed since Adam Walsh disappeared from Sears. 27 years of unanswered questions. 27 years of conflicting theories. 27 years of wondering whether the truth would ever be known. Most murder investigations grow colder with time. Witnesses forget. Evidence deteriorates. Memories fade. In Adam's case, something even worse had happened. Evidence hadn't just faded. Some of it had been lost. Critical opportunities had vanished. And the man most investigators believed was responsible had already died. Determined to get answers, John and Reve Walsh hired retired Detective Joe Matthews to conduct a complete review of the case. Not a summary. Not a quick evaluation. Everything. Every report. Every witness statement. Every lead. Every confession, every mistake, thousands of pages spanning nearly 3 decades. Matthews approached the investigation with one question. If you remove the rumors, the media coverage, and the speculation, where does the evidence actually lead? His conclusion was clear. Otis Toole was responsible for Adam Walsh's murder. Investigators at the Hollywood Police Department conducted their own review. They examined the same evidence, the same timelines, the same witness statements, the same confessions, and ultimately, they reached the same conclusion. For the department, the answer was no longer in doubt. The killer was Otis Toole. But there was one problem. There would never be a trial. There would never be cross-examination. There would never be a jury. Because Otis Toole had been dead for 12 years. On December 16, 2008, the Hollywood Police Department held a press conference. The room was packed. Reporters filled every seat. Cameras pointed toward the podium. And sitting nearby were John and Reve Walsh. Parents who had spent nearly 3 decades waiting for this moment. Police Chief Chad Wagner stepped forward. Then he did something few departments willingly do. He apologized. Not for the crime, but for the investigation. For lost evidence. For mistakes. For failures that had damaged the pursuit of justice. For opportunities that could never be recovered. It was an extraordinary admission. One that reflected the reality of what had happened. The investigation had not been perfect. Far from it. And everyone in the room knew it. Then came the announcement. Officially, the case was closed. The department stated that Otis Toole was responsible for Adam Walsh's murder. After 27 years, the investigation had reached its conclusion. For John Walsh, the moment carried enormous weight. For decades, one question had followed him everywhere. Who killed Adam? Now, at least officially, There was an answer. Not everyone agreed with it. Not every investigator was convinced. But for the Walsh family, the uncertainty that had defined their lives for nearly 3 decades had finally ended. Yet, even today, debate continues. Some investigators remain convinced the evidence points toward Otis Toole. Others believe Jeffrey Dahmer deserves far more scrutiny than he received. And because critical evidence was lost, no one can conclusively eliminate every doubt. There was no DNA match, no courtroom verdict, no guilty plea, no jury foreman standing to read a decision. Only a conclusion reached after decades of investigation. For some, that was enough. For others, questions remain, and perhaps they always will. But while the investigation struggled to find certainty, something remarkable was happening elsewhere. Something no one could have predicted during those terrible days in 1981. The Walsh family refused to let Adam become just another case file. They refused to let his story end at a gravesite. Instead, they transformed their grief into action. Only days after Adam's funeral, they began working to help other families facing the nightmare they had lived through. At the time, America's response to missing children was fragmented and often ineffective. Information moved slowly. Jurisdictional barriers created delays. Families frequently found themselves fighting the system while trying to find their children. John and Reve had experienced those failures firsthand. They knew exactly how dangerous they were, and they were determined to change them. Their efforts helped fuel major changes across the country. Missing children began receiving greater national attention. Law enforcement agencies gained better tools for sharing information. New systems were created to help locate endangered children faster. The gaps that had complicated Adam's case slowly began closing. One reform after another. One improvement after another. All driven by a family that refused to stop fighting. Then came a platform that would make John Walsh one of the most recognizable figures in America. In 1988, he became the host of America's Most Wanted. The concept was simple. Put fugitives on television. Show their faces. Tell their stories. Ask the public for help. The results were extraordinary. Criminals who believed they had disappeared suddenly found themselves recognized by neighbors, co-workers, and strangers. Tips poured in. Arrests followed. Again and again. Over the years, hundreds of fugitives were captured. Many dangerous offenders were taken off the streets. And every episode carried the same underlying mission. Protect families. Protect children. Prevent another tragedy. The influence of Adam's case extended even further. Retail stores introduced Code Adam procedures. If a child disappeared inside a store, employees immediately mobilized. Entrances were monitored. Searches began at once. Time was no longer wasted. The procedure was named after a little boy who had vanished from a department store decades earlier. A little boy whose disappearance exposed exactly how vulnerable children could be. Then came perhaps the most significant legacy of all. In 2006, the Adam Walsh Child Protection and Safety Act became law. The legislation strengthened protections for children and expanded tools available to law enforcement. Once again, Adam's name became attached to efforts designed to keep families safe. A child whose life ended at 6 years old was still protecting children decades later. That may be the most extraordinary part of this story. Not the investigation. Not the suspects. Not even the mystery that still surrounds parts of the case. It's the impact. Because Adam Walsh's life lasted only 6 years. Yet his influence has reached millions. Children who were recovered. Families who were reunited. Predators who were identified. Fugitives who were captured. Systems that were improved. Lives that were saved. All connected, in some way, to a little boy who never came home from Sears. Think back to that afternoon. A crowded store. Bright lights. Shoppers moving through aisles. A mother stepping away for only a few minutes. A 6-year-old boy standing beside an Atari display. Nothing seemed dangerous. Nothing seemed unusual. Then came a decision. A wrong turn. A moment no one recognized as important until it was too late. And everything changed. Adam Walsh was not a headline. He was not a law. He was not a symbol. He was a child. A little boy who loved baseball. A little boy who loved drawing. A little boy who trusted the world around him. And on July 27, 1981, that world failed him. The investigation may never satisfy everyone. Questions may remain forever. But one fact is beyond dispute. Adam Walsh changed America. And because of that, countless children got a chance he never received. To go home, to be found, to grow up, to live. And that may be the closest thing to justice this case will ever have. If Adam's story teaches us anything, it's that vigilance matters. Speaking up matters. Acting quickly matters. Because sometimes a single observation, a single phone call, or a single decision can change the outcome of an entire life. Thank you for watching Crime Vault. And remember, no case stays cold forever. Before you go, make sure you're subscribed to Crime Vault. Because next time, we're diving into another cold case that baffled investigators for years. A case where a single, overlooked clue sat hidden in plain sight while a killer walked free. At first, it looked like there were no witnesses, no suspects, and no way to solve it. But decades later, one breakthrough changed everything. You won't want to miss it. If you enjoy true crime stories that focus on real investigations, forensic breakthroughs, DNA evidence, and the pursuit of justice, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. And tell us in the comments, do you believe the Adam Walsh case was truly solved, or do you think important questions still remain? Until next time, stay safe, stay vigilant, and remember, no case stays cold forever.